his presentation. So please, we love having you all here. Please come in, take a seat so we can get started. Thank you. Thrilled to have you all here. Thrilled to welcome Dr. Russell Walker to discuss in advance of the publication of his new book, his talk on leveraging digital strategies and analytics in media and sports. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Walker. Thank you.
Great, thank you. It's great to be with you guys today. So first of all, I wanted to just share a little bit. First of all, thanks to the conference for sponsoring the book. You all have copies of it, and so very much welcome your thoughts and feedback on it. And I'm really interested in the digitalization of our lives and what this is doing to how we participate in media and how we even participate in sports. And I think there's a really big opportunity here. I'd like to talk about that. And the first thing about digitization is that companies who participate in digitization and our leaders have what we call digital platforms. And so just, a little reminder or sort of reference on this. We've probably all used Uber and Airbnb and Amazon and eBay and all of these things that we find immensely convenient. What's extremely powerful about them, of course, is that they perform measurement. They collect data, they collect customer data in a very detailed way. They have some other attributes that we're going to examine. Those attributes are very important in media, and I'll show some examples of that, and somewhat missing in sports, I would say. And so this is where I think there's an enormous opportunity for sports franchises, for advertisers, and for professionals who are looking to develop careers there. And so these digital platforms do, as I mentioned, provide a very important function of measurement. And if I could just say it's data creation, that they actually do record who did the transaction. And this sounds very basic, but I would argue that many of you came here in an Uber car, on an airplane, and checked into the hotel, and maybe used OpenTable to get a reservation, and everybody, all those networks, all those digital platforms have recorded your activity, right? You go to a sports game, and perhaps your name is not even known, or your presence even detected. And that's a real big opportunity. Of course, the analytics that we're here to talk about, which is so fascinating, is now possible once you have that measurement in place. So in very, very clear terms, the measurement is a prerequisite, and the digital platform is a very convenient way of doing that. But why are some digital platforms more successful than others? Be it in media or banking or any particular industry, is that they also offer execution. So the owner of this platform is very convenient, of course, when you're at Amazon, because they can offer recommendations, they can offer tips, and all of these other things that the company would like to do toward the consumer. So that's a very important characteristic, and that is customizable. And so I think this is really critical. It's not that you and I are going to watch different games, but there may be aspects of our experiences that can be customized. And I think knowing that, realizing that we do live in a highly customized society, and that we all expect a company to recognize us, our taste, and whatever it is that we've done in the past, and that level of customization, I think, in sports is tremendous, right? To recognize a fan that they've been there for 10 years, or whatever that would mean, is extremely powerful. So one of the great successes in this space, and it's a case that I wrote at Kellogg, is to look at Netflix in the case of digital platforms at work in media. And of course, we're probably very familiar with what they do, but I just wanted to highlight some of the things that the analytics in the digital platform that Netflix has created has allowed them to do. First of all, insights, when and where people actually watch movies. It was a big surprise that people watched them at odd hours and even watched partial movies and came back and played the rest of that. And of course, their predecessor and competitor, Blockbuster, had no idea of that. The fact that they could introduce new products, I think that's tremendous. The fact that they could bring TV shows to market. They entered the game business with some limited success, but that allowed those inventions, innovations, if you would, were possible because they were measuring their consumer in a very detailed way. The asset reuse, and I'm going to talk a little bit about economic concept of asset surveillance and how it relates to sports, but I think what was very fascinating about Netflix is that they could find niche markets. So if you like foreign films, as I do, they could figure that out and say, hey, these films that essentially are not watched, I can take those to market. I can create a market around those. This is immensely powerful in sports. Every one of us in here is the fan of some team, and mine have not always been great. And so when that happens, you say, those few good years, I'd pay money to watch those games or the highlights of those games. So asset reuse in sports has tremendous opportunity, and at least I haven't found a great example, nowhere near the example of Netflix for that. And so I don't want to watch other teams' replays. Probably you would feel the same way. You'd like to watch your team or a particular season. And so I think that type of opportunity is one that could be very driven by data, customized to unique customers, and there's revenue for that. The introduction of new markets, so Netflix had a tremendous success and enjoys a great success on mobile platforms, which I'm going to say a little bit more about. It creates a whole new level of data and interaction with a customer, because through their app they begin to measure other things, geographic location, time of day, interruptions, and other things that you do on your phone or we do, and that provides a whole new level of insight where you live, where you travel, where you probably work. It's very interesting if I wanted to establish measures of disposable income or likely salary levels, which perhaps an advertiser would really like to know. And so the pricing control, if we were giving this presentation to people in the media industry, they'd be aghast at literally what Netflix has been able to do. They've been able to decide, more or less, what the price of a movie should be, or at least the royalty rights on that. And why is that the case? They have put themselves between the consumer and the movie house, and they collect the data on those consumers. And in doing so, they have the data that's necessary for pricing. And so if you think about the parallel in sports, we go to a stadium, maybe we buy our ticket from the sports franchise, maybe we buy it through another intermediary, sports StubHub or Ticketmaster or something like that, but very few franchises, or leagues I would even say, have the opportunity right now to conduct that measurement at a fan level basis. And so then when you say, well, what's a fair price for a ticket? Well, I'm not sure that it's data-driven. I think it could be significantly more data-driven, and I totally appreciate the dynamic pricing models that have developed, but none of those are specific to a fan. Those are just specific to a market condition. And so this kind of opportunity that Netflix has for us, I think, is a real wake-up call. I really do believe that the customer is king in everything we do. And so I think this is a reality that we live with. All businesses live with this. It's not sports or media. It happens to be that there's some big inroads, certainly in the area of media. We will see this in medicine, of course, customized medicine. This will happen in finances. I'm sure you expect to go to your bank and your bank to recognize who you are and have all of your transactions and all of your frequent flyer points and all of that there. And so this now suggests to me that a company who does business with customers, and in fact, sports is really more about customers, I think, than we realize in their fandom, is that the data on them is really an asset. And we should think about positioning the enterprise to look at that asset so that we could cultivate it and we could generate new opportunities. This is the research I do, what I get excited about. So just a little final word here on Netflix. This is some measurement that they can take. When is a customer a fan? I think it's really powerful, and that question is very appropriate for what we all do here in sports. And they do this by different shows, and so you can see the y-axis is the number of episodes. And so for some of their very successful programs, you just need to watch twice, and you're a fan. And then some you might have to watch 4 or 5 times. How does that work in sports? How many games do you have to go to? How many years? How many wins do you have to experience? And so something like that suggests exactly the same kind of phenomena I'm trying to measure, or suggest that you would. How would you measure fandom at a very particular and very individual level? Now, I thought I would take a little step outside of sports and maybe give a little economic evaluation of why data and how it's important, and how intermediaries in the world of digital platforms challenge us. So this is an example from my book. Suppose I own a billboard, a real billboard out here on 90 or 93, and you say, well, what's the billboard worth as an asset? And I guess you'd call Department of Transportation, and they'd tell you how many thousands of people drive by the billboard. And you would use that as some sort of surrogate for the measure of the attractiveness, and then your advertiser who wants to put their brand on this would say, well, thanks, that's really helpful, and I'll pay you something as a function of the number of eyeballs who see this billboard. But that data's wrong, for certain. Nothing against your Department of Transportation. Ours in Illinois is horrific. And so in any case, but who knows that data right now, interestingly, AT&T and Verizon could take their data and train it on a longitude, latitude. This is a rather trivial exercise for them because they have that data. If we just did a sort of inversion of the data, if you would, some SQL query, we could come up with that. But they actually know more than the count. They would know the names. They know where else you go. They know where you live. They know where you work. And so now, very quickly, Verizon and AT&T could say something about not only how many people, but which people and what types. And if I'm Mercedes and I want to put my brand up there, I want to put it in a place where there are people who actually can afford my car. And so that information now transformed into some data product, a recommendation for marketing, a recommendation for price of the billboard, raises lots of interesting questions. Who's in control of the billboard? The billboard owner or the person who measures it? And I would say the one who can measure it has immense control over the value of that asset. And if you don't agree with me, there are a few Nobel Prizes behind that too, okay? So this notion of asset surveillance and how we use that information to price markets is immensely important. So I think that's at work in sports. And I'll offer a little challenge here without going too deep. If I can do that to a billboard, which seems a little innocuous, and you think, okay, I'm not going to really ever own billboards, but I might own a building, and that's the John Hancock building. What's it worth? Clearly, its economic activity is a measure of its worth. Who goes in the building? What kind of people? What kind of businesses operate there? What are their revenues? A landlord loves to pinch their tenant, right? I mean, let's be honest. I mean, your contribution as a landlord is a function of precisely the economic activity and success that your tenant achieves. Now let's train that to a stadium. I put up billboards, I attract advertisers to be in my arena, and they're going to ask, who sees it? How many people? What kind of people? And you can't answer that, but someone else can. That means you've lost control, or you can lose control of that pricing. And so that's very important because that's a tremendous revenue source, of course, for arenas, for sports teams, and the advertisers have very serious messages, and they're very intent on getting that to the right demographic. I think about this because there are a lot of open-ended questions in sports, and I realize there are technological advances helping us close this, but for many teams, some very fundamental questions exist. Who's actually in the seat? Where did they buy the ticket? Online, through me, through a broker? Did they buy something else? What else did they do while they were there? Did they buy food and merchandise? I think it's very interesting because sports are in many ways an experience. So you go to a sporting event, maybe not because you're trying to find the cheapest hat, clearly, but you're trying to have an experience, which is often shared with family members or friends or co-workers, whatever the case may be. Who else is with you? Are you in a group party? Right? How do I measure collective experience? If I can't measure individual, I'm certainly not doing that very well. And then what else do they do? Maybe even outside of the event itself. And I think what's fascinating about fandom is that you don't stop being a fan when the game ends. You're still a fan. And so maybe your interest sort of moves with the season and when the sport is played, but your interest clearly is still there. And so, running a sports franchise, you have a brand, you have a message that's very powerful to people. How do you interact with them other times of the year? So, graphically, and I mean this just to sort of generalize what should a digital platform do, well, you have two sides. You have a company that operates it. They provide services and information, and then, of course, an individual who interacts with it. And their interaction isn't, please tell me your name and fill out a survey. I wouldn't consider that a digital platform. Instead, I can go to a place, obviously, identify myself, but I get something back. I get information about the team or the players. I can buy tickets. I can confirm my reservation. I can go to Amazon, and I'm sure many of us probably have even done that today, and say, well, what can I do? I can shop. I can get information and provide information as well. So that interaction with assets, that's really what becomes really powerful in the platform. And of course, there's another thing about moving to mobile which is immensely fascinating. This example I gave of the billboard in real estate, and of course now related to, say, a stadium, I don't have to ask a consumer, please tell me that you're at the stadium. Once you've become a user of my app, and this becomes really critical in why apps are so powerful, I can get your longitude and latitude. I can do it all the time, provided you don't turn off the privacy setting. That's a different conversation, right? So, and if you say, well, that's the case, then who's going to do that measurement of the fan? Is that going to be one of our networks? Is that going to be a sports team? Will it be a league? And of course, that happens on all the different digital platforms. And so now location, movement, interaction with the brand can be measured, what I say is passively. I don't actually have to ask you for that. You're going to start giving it up as a function of your technology. That's happening right now while we're all in this room. The other thing that data allows us to do is create what I call data products. This is obviously a little outside of sports, but I think it's fascinating that we've assembled so many people here who are MBAs and of course, in management consultants. And I have a tremendous respect for what LinkedIn has done in this space. And when you think about LinkedIn, we all go to it, we get information about our industry, our career, or who reads your blogs. And then if you're a recruiter, of course, you have very specific information, and they pay quite dearly for that. Now, I use an example here from LinkedIn's research team. When the big investment banks failed, Bear Stearns, Lehman, and such, they did an analysis, and they said, well, where did these people end up? And provided that they had LinkedIn profiles, they could actually measure that. That's fascinating. We could train that now to universities and say, if we looked at management consultants, BCG, Deloitte, and such, and you say, where did they go to school? Well, here are the 3 top MBA programs for that. Let's train it to fans. Where do you go? What car do you drive? Where do you live? That'd be fascinating. Who can actually do that now? I'm not sure anyone can. But if I had a franchise or if I'm in the league, I'd like to be able to do that, because when an advertiser or television contract becomes available, I'd like to be able to say, my league has a unique demographic. In fact, we can confirm the presence in our cohort of particular individuals of a certain wealth or a particular individual characteristic, whatever that might be. That notion that I can create a product, I can answer a particular question posed by an advertiser or offered to an advertiser with the purpose of controlling price, I think that's very powerful. Imagine some of you have seen this. This is, of course, taken from the data science team at Facebook. And this is an example of what I call passive data capture. They did not ask people who their favorite NFL team is. They simply went to people who denoted that on their Facebook page. And I think that's really powerful. I believe we could probably all look at this for days if you're a football fan, and you could see the residue of certain television distribution contracts that existed back in the 80s and before. Being that we're in Boston, I think we probably have some Patriots fans who would celebrate the reality that the New York Jets enjoy no plurality in no county anywhere in North America. And in any case, their challenges being what they are, how do you look at this and say, if I'm a league or I'm an owner or the manager or a sports executive for that team, advance the dominance, if I could, of your team? It's a little bit like playing empire building. I do find a few things fascinating. One of them is that the Falcons simply don't have as much of the South as you would think. And you think, well, why is that the case? I don't know. And I'm just giving tactical ideas here as an example. You say, well, how would I encroach on other areas? There are probably things I could do. There are implications to advertisers that are immense. If I do want to advertise with a team, where can I do it? Where would I be most successful? Possibly an agent of a player might even say, where would endorsements of my player, where would placement of my client be most powerful geographically? How many people are there? And again, this is passive. We just had people announce themselves, and I think that's very powerful. And if football's not your sport, as it is for me, we do the same thing for baseball. There are greater complexities here, and we're proud of both the Cubs and the White Sox in Chicago, but you can see Cub land is a lot bigger than in the White Sox. And then this notion that I just raised of Atlanta, and you say, well, why did the Braves have so much of the South, but football-wise, the Falcons only have perhaps the Georgia area? So there's kind of questions now become opportunities that can be translated into how you expand your brand and the influence and even control the price of it. So what do I do and how might this help you? So this is the area that I research in, is how do companies then get ready to do the things that we spoke about today, the questions I posed, how do you assemble that? The very first thing is that you have to have data. So I've got a framework for how companies go about being successful in this space. The first is to bring sources of data. It's not enough to say, well, the league will give me that, or I'll get this from, Ticketmaster or wherever. You probably create your own data. It's probably more attractive to do so, and if you can't, to partner with someone exclusively. And then to innovate on that data, to create these data products that I talked about, to answer very powerful questions, and answer questions that you might be able to answer for other people. Maybe you are one of these intermediaries that we talked about. And then, of course, continue that through growing. So I think a lot of companies have viewed data as kind of a tax, a cost, right? I mean, I view it as an asset. So if it's an asset, how do I grow it? How do I approach it with that kind of mindset? And that's a management attitude. And then, of course, taking that to market. So if you can measure an asset, you can say, I know how many people looked at that billboard today. And I know where they live. And I know what cars they drive. Create a data product on that you could provide to advertisers. That's going to be very powerful. And then lastly, you got to have people who do this, and I think you're in a wonderful community to find many of those. So analytics are obviously the prerequisite to everything we talked about. And then, of course, some takeaways. And these takeaways, I should say, come as an observer to working with many sports franchises. So at Kellogg, I lead and founded the Analytical Consulting Lab, which is a lab class. And very proud to say that we've had the opportunity and privilege to work with many leading sports franchises in the Chicago area and elsewhere in NCAA sports to help them with many of these questions. And many of my students are here who've led those projects. And so first thing that you need to do as an enterprise, as a sports franchise or a league, is to develop a digital platform to begin that measurement. To measure your fan. When do you know they're a fan? Who are they? And then, of course, to create these data products, leverage passive data capture, and then use data for growth. And so I would also encourage the development of an experimentation culture, but that is not every idea is going to be a winner, right? And so if you can build a team and encourage them to try and experiment with the data, I think that would be very helpful. I hope those takeaways help you. Hope my message shares something powerful with you. It's been really wonderful to be with you. We may have a few minutes for questions, and I welcome any of those, so thank you. Thanks, guys. Yes, sir.
In your experience, which college programs are most advanced at the moment in their analytical capabilities?
Well, that's very interesting. We just did a project for Northwestern looking at their use of advertisement, and we had a wonderful team that did some rank order analysis relative to other sports. This is not an endorsement, but certainly by what we saw, it appeared that Stanford was doing quite a good job. And that, as you would expect, other big, well-funded teams, Big Ten, SEC teams, it was particularly geared toward football and men's basketball, seemed to be very far ahead. And, well, full disclosure, we at Northwestern have a few things to work on. But in any case, there seems to be a separation in the pack. Yes, sir. In the back. No. This is sort of a question around what we expect in society. I used to be a banker, and I'm very familiar with the privacy laws in financial services. And, of course, there's another set of laws in healthcare. What Netflix does is not illegal. What I think is very powerful is that even though it may have a little feel of creepiness to it, most fans, and certainly for the case of Netflix, people don't say, hey, you're tracking me because, why is Netflix tracking you? They want to offer you better recommendations. People are fine with that. As long as you're not penalized, I think that's fine. And as long as you're transparent, I think you'll win over most people. And it's not illegal right now. That I couldn't give you the fair answer because I haven't peered into that. At least the teams we've worked with, I think it's fair to say there's ground to be covered, right? And I'm not aware of someone who has. I do think digital ticketing is really a tremendous advancement. So I guess at least the Giants or some teams have that, which is great. If I ran a franchise, I'd want to measure my own fan, And I'm just giving very honest advice. These models exist economically in other businesses. Don't let someone else do that for you. Or if you can't do it as the owner, then have the league do it, right? And so, there is some investment that has to be made, but someday someone else is going to tell you what your ticket's worth. I mean, that happens right now in the secondary market, right? So, losing control of pricing is very dangerous. Leader in digital in? Yeah, I think there's some that are tremendous. I mean, everyone talks about Uber, and so the principles I put up there for digital platform, measurement, convenience, execution, customization, the fact that they can even do surge pricing, all of those, and the fact that they did this very quickly in a highly fragmented market is tremendous. Their capital investment's nowhere near the likes of Amazon or eBay. So what I'm suggesting is you can be quite nimble in this space. So many of them we would recognize, and so they do have to achieve a critical mass. What's fascinating about it is once you've done that, you don't usually have 4 or 5 competing. You know, it's a digital winners. It's almost 1-0 some game. Like you can take most of it. Sometimes you see a second like Lyft and they compete, or the economics would be they compete on some characteristics. But winner takes all generally. Any other questions? All right, great to be with you guys. Thank you.